Well, hello everyone, and welcome to FLI's video series entitled The FLI Life, Navigating the Personal and Professional Post-Stanford. I am Dr. Marlette Jackson, class of 2018, and I'm currently a manager of diversity and inclusion at Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. I am also a board member of FLON. Today's talk will be with Dr. Nidia Ruedas-Gracia on one of a series of conversations where FLI alumni will get a chance to share their story about life beyond Stanford, unpacking how their FLI identity informs their personal and professional journey. The series will include several videos highlighting a diverse array of FLI alumni stories to inspire connection and community. I'm beyond excited to be sitting here with Nidia, who is the class of 2019 and currently a tenure track professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So, Nidia, I'm so glad to have you and thank you for joining us today. To get us started, I'll begin by asking you a few questions about your background and FLI identity information or FLI identity formation. Are you ready for this?
Sounds good. Let's go.
All right. So to start, could you briefly just provide a few sentences on your background, including what you would like to share with the audience about your community, your experiences, your career path, and your identities?
Yeah. So I am Nidia, and I identify as Mexican American from Los Angeles area. Born and raised in Los Angeles County, specifically Baldwin Park, California, where the first In-N-Out was made. So if you like In-N-Out, I know Marlette, you might not be such a fan, but and that's where I grew up. Largely the population there, a lot of immigrant families, a lot of Mexican American families. My first language was actually Spanish, so I didn't learn English until I started going to school, until I went to kindergarten. And raised most of my life with my mama, so single mom, and three brothers that keep my life busy. And FLI identity, so definition wise, my mom has an AA, so she went to the local community college in her town of Calexico, California, which is a border town between Mexico and California. So she did get an AA there in physical education. My dad went up to maybe third grade in Mexico, and then eventually, once he became an adult, migrated to the United States. So that's a little bit of my background in terms of the definition of FLI, where you come from a low-income background, which I definitely did, and still have a lot of family members that are still in the low-income bracket. And then first generation in the sense that I was the first generation in my family to go to college. So neither of my parents went to a four-year college, even though my mom had a little bit of community college that she went to. It's, as you know, a different world when you're in a four-year and a master's and a PhD. And I actually wasn't really aware of the FLI identity until I got a little bit more into my higher ed journey. So at UCLA, that's where I did my bachelor's. I knew about the first gen identity. That's where I learned about it. Really a prominent identity. There wasn't a first gen center. They didn't get a first gen center until way after I graduated. So it wasn't one of those identities that was highlighted or that there were a lot of resources for. Then I went and got my master's at NYU in New York. So I can definitely talk a lot for people who want to know about that experience of being FLI and only daughter in a Mexican household and just hopping on a plane and going across the country for a couple years. And there, again, wasn't really familiar with the FLI identity. But then once I went for my PhD at Stanford, that's where there was the Leland Scholars Program and a lot of people talking about being FLI. And that's where I really realized this is a very prominent identity. A lot of people identify this way and are living, their lived experiences as FLI students is really important. So to me, I really like the term FLI because a lot of times when we think of first gen students or students with FLI identities, we think of hardship, we think of barriers, which are definitely there. They exist and they're present, but there's also so much resilience and so much Pause. Can you hear that in the background?
Just a little bit.
Okay, okay. Just making sure. Okay. So I can just restate that sentence when people want to cut. Okay. Okay. Um, so I definitely like the FLI identity because although a lot of times when we think of it, we think of hardship and barriers, which are definitely there and they exist. There's also a lot of beauty to the culture of being FLI, and there's a lot of resilience and a lot of knowledge and skills and values that we have. So it's really a lifestyle and a culture, and I think FLI encapsulates that very well.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to your earlier point, no, I'm not a fan of In-N-Out. Girl, you know, in Texas, we love us some Raising Cane's and some Chick-fil-A. And also shout out to your mom. She is literally the sweetest. But I definitely hear you on kind of what resonated with me was kind of how your FLI identity became salient at different points. And similarly for me, it really didn't become salient until I was in undergrad, where we actually did have a formal program that was for first generation and or low income students. So I received a scholarship at Texas A&M University. We had a student group. We took courses together, and our faculty members and professors knew we were FLI. So there were additional resources and workshops and curricula that was reported to us. We lived together. It was this whole community. And you're right, it is a lifestyle because even beyond kind of our educational experiences, we connected on so many other things. We came from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds, gender identities, a variety of other identities, but there was something about the FLI identity that connected us and helped us create this sense of community. And you're right, it is a lifestyle, it's a culture. We're fly and fly, FLI and FLY.
Definitely. We're all so FLI.
Exactly. So I'm wanting to dig a little bit deeper into when you were talking about your experience in undergrad and graduate school. Can you tell me a little bit about, in particular, what was it like experiencing college and what was it like experiencing graduate school as a FLI person?
Yes. So what was it like? There's definitely a lot of not knowing. So that's like I'll start with the hardships or the barriers. So there was a lot of not knowing what to do. I went to college and I didn't even know what a major was, and that's something that I very clearly remember, and I think it will stay with me for the rest of my life. They told me to go to orientation and I just went and I was like, all right, where's my like list of classes, just like high school? And they were like, no, you choose your classes. And I was like, how am I supposed to do that? So I clearly remember um, not knowing, a lot of not knowing. And even in a PhD program, there was a lot of not knowing. There's a lot of learning that you're doing that's not just content, not just research methods, not just, your classes, but learning how to navigate this new world, and learning how to tell people about it. So one thing that I really appreciate about the term FLI and more people knowing about this is that now I can actually say it. Like when I tell people that I'm FLI or that I'm first gen, a lot more people will get it than they used to before. And so I don't have to go through the whole spiel of explaining, oh yeah, my parents, like I don't have to go through all of that. And there's more language to the identity. So that happened more during my PhD program and at Stanford. Yes, a lot of not knowing and a lot of me building these skills. If I didn't have them, I had to have them. The skill of like having to ask questions and figuring out who to trust and who to not trust, and all of those logistics behind the scenes that I had to do. But the positives I think about that are also, like I said, that beauty and that culture. So it's been really fun. Not always easy, but it has been really fun and fulfilling to keep my two worlds connected. So a lot of times, FLI students might feel like their college home is different from their back home, and that those people really can't mix, and those friends can't mix, and those values can't mix. And so I've really tried really hard since UCLA to try to keep those two in communication and kind of existing together. And I think that's been really fun, like bringing my friends from back home into college campus and having them meet my college friends, and then vice versa. Like bringing, for example, through my research is where I tell the college world, like, hey, there's this world that exists over here and it's really fun and it's really wise and it's really valuable. So really bringing those in has been not easy, and not always fun, but for the most part fun and very fulfilling.
So when you think about, you're talking about navigating a lot of the unknowns and these questions, kind of like this hidden curricula, right? That folks are expected to know, but oftentimes don't. I'm wondering if post graduation, how your kind of fly identity has evolved, right? And how have you been able to kind of navigate these further unknowns post graduation?
Yeah. So I had a little moment because whenever you say fly, it's kind of, if it's followed by student. So like being a fly student. So being enrolled in a college is part of, seems to be part of that fly identity. So then I graduate and I'm like, I'm not a student anymore. So am I still fly? And I know a lot of us are still trying to think through that. Like, do we say former fly? Do we say fly background? But then I realized, like, I still hold these values and practices. So I'm definitely still that person. It's just not tied to the student anymore. Um, and in real world scenarios, you're still very much, you can say, like, I was a first gen student, and a lot of the ways that I work post graduation, a lot of the things that I do are still that person, just in a new context. And, the fly identity, I feel like the higher and higher up I went, the less people I was interacting with that were from a fly background. So it's harder to kind of find community sometimes around that specific identity. But then there are also so many other identities that are interplayed. So, for example, I was a fly student, but part of that is being from an immigrant background. Part of that was being from, a low income background, and those people definitely still are. Around in my post grad life. So it's been really definitely a lot of reflection going on because I'm like, oh, I'm not a student anymore, but it's still present in my life. I'm still the same person. I still value similar things. And I think one other fulfilling thing has been, I know we joke and like, oh, like I'm an elder now. So we talk about like how we're the older ones now, but it's really nice providing that mentorship and signing off on those letters of recommendation. And it's such a great feeling when like a fly student that's currently an undergrad or a grad comes to me and asks me like, for example, I feel really shy or weird asking for a letter of recommendation, or hey, like, should I go to master's or PhD? And me being able to have that conversation with them and have it in the context of being fly and understanding those needs that are different from a traditional student, that's been really fulfilling too. And so I feel like that's been a part of my post grad fly life of like, okay, now I have this hat of being a mentor and having some knowledge, having some elderly wisdom.
I love that. And it seems like everything's kind of come full circle, right? You went from navigating the unknowns to now you get to help other fly students and other students from a variety of different backgrounds navigate those unknowns. And what struck me also about what you said was as you continue to go higher up, that community or your knowledge of individuals who come from a fly background, it kind of shrinks. So I'm wondering, how have you kind of fostered a sense of community post graduation, and how have these communities supported your fly identity?
hmm Um, I can't say I have the answer yet because I'm like such a recent grad. But what I've noticed is that um, the fly identity is very diverse. So there's not just one type of fly student. And because there are other identities in the mix there, you can tap in, shout out, sweetie, you can tap into those other identities. So if you are from a low income background, meeting other community members from a low income background has been helpful. Or, I identify as Latinx and Mexican American. And so there's parts of that culture that's very near and dear to my heart. And so connecting with that community. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that even within the FLI identity, there is still a lot of intersectionality, and there's all kinds of identities. My identity as a woman, my identity as a woman of color. So all of those crisscross, and they molded and created my FLI identity. And so even if I look at someone and they might not necessarily be FLI, they have these other identities that I can kind of connect with. And yeah, you might meet a lot of people who might not be FLI in maybe the sense that they have a parent who has a bachelor's, but I'm finding it, it's just statistically, probability wise, it's also harder to find people who have parents who have PhDs or masters. And so technically, right, we're like fly in that sense where my some of my friends might have a bachelor's, but or their parents might have a bachelor's, but their parents don't have a master's or a PhD. And so we start connecting on that sense where it's like, oh yeah, my parents didn't have a PhD either. Yeah, we both were scrambling in this PhD journey. So I think that's been something that's been helpful to realize that the FI identity has a lot of color to it, and finding people that relate to me in those colors or those different identities can be helpful.
Yeah, I love that. The Fly Identity definitely has a lot of color to it. And it was interesting when you were talking about how you were able to kind of find some camaraderie and sense of connection. And it may not have been, individuals that were first gen low income in the sense of their undergraduate degree, but sometimes also in the PhD process, and how that experience is different, but still you were able to connect on that. And, as you know, all too well. Being fly is oftentimes a lot about being the first, right? So the first in your family to go to college, and there's a huge literature on being fly as a student, but less so on the fly background after college. So I'm curious as to what you have learned from being the first, as it relates to your familial responsibilities, your relationships, your friendships. What has that looked like?
Hmm. Yes. So one thing that comes up to mind fairly quickly that a lot of fly students might also feel the pain and joy of is being a lot more responsible for family things. So I was already, and this is for like people who might be a little bit more like familiar or family oriented. Like not every fly student is like this, of course, because we're all different colors. But I was already from the get go very, very close to my family, very close knit, and had a lot of responsibilities. But as I moved up in higher education and then now having the job that I have now or the career that I have now, family responsibilities have been increased and heightened. And that's a lot of pressure. And it's not easy to just say no or kind of back out of those responsibilities. And so that's something that I've noticed that happened as a result of kind of being fly and moving up the ladder. Nobody in my extended family has a PhD, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that financially, but also just in terms of knowledge and knowledge, um, a- like acquiring knowledge and helping. We always hear in the kind of undergrad fly research how we're language brokers, or we know how to balance a budget with our parents, and we would go to the doctors with them and translate things. um, and I went from translating things to now I'm reading through that medication and I can read through what it means and how it's going to affect, and I'm having these direct conversations with doctors. So the responsibilities have definitely heightened, as I've kind of transitioned into post grad, and living my best life has also come with this added pressure of having a lot of family responsibilities.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. as I was navigating college as well as graduate school, a lot of like my cousins or even like my parents' friends would come to me and be like, "Hey, Marlette, can you help me with my resume?" Or, "Hey, Marlette, can you help me with my cover letter?" And it was in fields and industries that I have no idea what it's like to do XYZ. But there was
Just had to
something
learn.
well, I was like, I learned. I did some quick research. I was like, what bullet points would work well with the person in this job? But it's interesting because it's like, even though, we may not be in the same industry, being FLI and being the first to navigate these systems, there then comes this level of respect, right? And this level of trust that they're like, oh, someone like me who comes from my community has navigated this successfully. Maybe they can help me too. And it's definitely an obligation and a pressure, but it's also an awesome responsibility, because if you think like, well, what would that person might have done if they didn't have a me, right? And there are so many other families who haven't had their first kind of like FLI student. So it's definitely a lot more responsibilities, but I think it's also great in the way that we can kind of help our own communities reshape their pathways. And it doesn't have to be necessarily through institutions of higher education, but and through whatever way that we can support them. So definitely, girl, I get you. These increased responsibilities. And I'm wondering, because you in particular are a unique case and a wonderful case in that your part of your job is to study students who come from these backgrounds. So can you tell me a little bit about your FLI identity and how it intersects with what you do in the workplace?
Yes. I I will say that I know the world is a hot mess right now, but I feel really fortunate that my worlds collide so well, and part of that might have been intentional. And I kind of, as a PhD student, you get to choose what topic you want to be an expert with, and I was like, let's do this one. And so it's just the fly identity is something that I talk about a lot in my research, that we talk a lot about in meetings and in grant applications. It's just very part of my world. Um, and so it's, yeah, I might have done that on purpose, but I think there's a little bit of luck to that too, and that I was able to do that in my research and in my trajectory. Um, But we're gonna have to cut here because what was the question?
No worries. It was like, how does your FLI identity intersect with the workplace?
Oh yeah, because not just work research. Okay, I'm back.
Oh,
um,
girl.
so yeah, I think my fly identity intersects very well into the research that I do. But if I were to take that away, and not talk about exactly the research, I think being a faculty and being from a FLI background is definitely something that I am aware of every day. Partly because it's so new to a lot of people, but it's new to FLI undergrads and FLI grads. And so for them to turn and see this person embodying and celebrating this FLI culture has maybe made it a little bit easier for them to relate to faculty, not just me, but others, because then they can make that connection of like, okay, well, this person is also FLI, is doing research. Now there's a little bit of a teeny opening there, and like maybe I can do that too. But at minimum, you can come knock on my door and have some of my snacks and sit down. And, like there's a big poster in front of my door. It's like La Profesora, and like you can't miss it. And I think that's part of our color and our life of being FLI. It's like we we're very passionate and we enjoy a lot of the things that we do, and our lives are not easy, but there's a lot of passion and joy and interest in what we're doing. And so I think that me being FLI kind of connects FLI undergrads and grads to this very very weird and nebulous thing that is a faculty member. And I feel really grateful for that I can kind of show people like you can still hold on to this identity and have this color, and be a faculty member, versus maybe before they didn't see that. And then the FLI identity comes through in with me personally in meetings, in faculty, like town halls and stuff, because I see people saying words and putting sentences together that I still cannot. And I was just like, how can they do this? And they know about sabbaticals and they know about like which journals to publish in. And I'm like still trying to figure it out. And it's just, yes, there's always this like, just like in undergrad, just like in grad school, there's this kind of point where I'm like, man, I still don't know everything. Um, but it's a, I don't know, blessing and a curse because when I don't understand those sentences or when I don't understand how they're saying things, I still kind of I'm pretty extroverted, so I'll still talk anyway. And it brings into the conversation the idea that, those kind of sentences, those kind of that jargon and that kind of communication style is not the only one. There's this one too, and we can also talk this way, and we can have these kind of values and traditions and practices that come from being FLI. We can bring that in and also work with that. So it's kind of cool sometimes. Like at first, I get a little bit like, oh, I don't know what they're saying. I don't understand. How do they know all this stuff? But then I'm like, oh, it's because I'm FLI. So let me bring some FLI in here and color it up a little bit, sprinkle some of our culture and some of our joy. So it is hard, but I think I like a lot of times during my grad school we talked about FLI finessing, and so I like to FLI finesse through life and just like I'm gonna finesse this and see how I can make this work. And so far it's been working. So
Yeah, I love how you were able to talk about how you can kind of change what FLI looks like and change what professorship looks like and change what an academic research mentor looks like to a variety of audiences, right? By having something that says "La Profesora" outside of your door, by when someone walks into your office, they can see, oh, a professor also looks like this. And then when you're engaging in faculty meetings, you can ask the questions and you can add your FLI finesse. I love that to kind of also show that, oh, this is also what a faculty member looks like. So just you doing these small, subtle acts really can have a large impact on changing our mindsets on what a X person looks like and how that can also incorporate the FLI identity. And I love that. Thank you for doing that, girl. And I think that's interesting because I feel like what's kind of unique about you is that you are kind of very forthcoming about your FLI identity, about all of your women of color identity, a lot of your various different identities. And so, at the work or in home, how have you negotiated expectations that individuals have of you, but also expectations and, you have of yourself when it comes to your different background?
yeah. Ooh, that's deep. It's definitely a work in progress, and I like that it's a work in progress. I have a trusty therapist, counselor that I recommend all people to have, but also FLI students if you have access to a mental health service or a therapist, a counselor. Also, FLI students, if you're interested in counseling psychology, please do it because we need more FLI therapists and therapists of color. So go do that, please, if you like it. So if you can find a good fit, a therapist for you, and you have that access to that resource, I think that's very helpful because that's where I negotiate all that. That's where I talk that out and figure out like what boundaries am I going to put for my family, for my work, because the thing about being FLI, if I do say so myself, is that we are so FLI that everybody wants a piece. Everybody wants our opinion, everybody wants our knowledge, everybody wants our experience. And so that takes a lot of energy to give. And so you kind of have to negotiate how much energy I'm going to give to whom and when and all of that. And then on top of that, because we're intersectional, we have a lot of identities. Our identities can be under attack at various points. Like even right now, a lot of our identities are under attack. That takes a lot of energy. And so really in those counseling sessions is where I tease all that apart and where I practice saying no and where I practice kind of doing the Homer Simpson and backing out of some things like that could or practice being a little bit more explicit and saying explicitly no instead of kind of avoiding it. So that's the main way that I've dealt with all of these responsibilities, kind of talking it through with someone who's trained in talking it through and that has a lot of my social identities so that she also understands where I'm coming from. Um, and then I guess another one, it might seem like a cop out, but another one that I've found to be very helpful now is also being very kind to myself. So I don't know all the answers, and some days I'm just gonna say yes to something I shouldn't have, and some days something's gonna take a lot of my energy and it shouldn't have. And then I just kind of I have to practice to be okay with that because I'm not always going to perfectly be able to navigate that and set boundaries. And there's going to be bad days and there's going to be good days. There's going to be days where I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Um, I I bought a house recently, and there were days where I'm like, I'm in this house like I'm an adult. Let me pay my mortgage. Like, ooh, I did that right. Like, I'm finessing. Life is great. And then there's days where I'm like, I don't even know where my like AC button or like I don't know. I don't know where my water filter whatever like I'm like I don't know what I'm doing, and there's very few people in my family who own homes, so I don't know who to reach out to. And so there's some bad days and some good days, but being kind to myself and saying like, yeah, you are doing this for the first time. You are working through a lot of these things, and your ancestors worked way too hard for you to not be kind to yourself and to be patient with yourself. So yeah, some days you're just gonna be falling all over the place, but that's okay. You're gonna, you know, get together, you're gonna reflect and you're going to figure it out. But yeah, just being kind, I think, has been a big one, especially these past few months.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially at a time like this and at all times, being kind to yourself is super important, and maintaining mental health hygiene is always paramount. And you already know how I feel about you and your mortgage. That's some adult level stuff. I'm paying my mortgage.
I just think the property taxes now. I'm like,
I know.
I'm
Especially
like,
for
what percent am I paying? How much am I giving my city?
it's that's congratulations, especially for fly folks. That is a huge, huge, huge accomplishment. And when I get to that level, girl, I'm going to call you. Um, fly folks, we have those networks and communities. We support each other.
Actually, I was thinking, I think that's the other thing about being fine. Like, as I'm going through this new thing, I'm also taking notes because I'm like, the next five person who buys a house, like, I have my notes set up ready to go so that I can just send these over. When I went on the job market, same thing. Had a very organized folder because I was like, I'm gonna have to pass this on to someone else. So that's like another, pressure, but it's fulfilling. And I was also going to say, not all FLI students, but definitely me, this idea of being perfect, because it's been required for survival for so many years. And so part of the being kind is knowing, like, yeah, I do like being perfect. I do like having control over situations, but that might not always be possible. And so, like, let me be extra kind because I am a perfectionist, but being a perfectionist, you want to have balance, of course, but it's something very real that we had to live because being fly and having to keep moving, you had to be perfect. We didn't have space for error or for mistakes. So it's totally, I mean, it makes total sense, and we just gotta also like be mindful of that we had to be perfect and there will be times where we don't have to be perfect, but we might have hard time gauging that.
Exactly. Oftentimes, fly students don't have the luxury or the privilege to mess up, right? There is no safety net. There is no option or plan B. And so you just kind of have to roll with the punches and keep them moving. And, girl, I could talk to you all day because offline, we're actual
I
friends.
know, right? We're like, all right, let's
But I have two questions to wrap up because I know you are la profesora. You're busy, okay? You're booked and busy. But I'm wondering, what are a few things you would like to impart on new FLI alumni as they're beginning to navigate life post Stanford?
Hmm. So kind of like some advice or just messages.
Yeah, some advice, best practices, thoughts, reflections. What would you have liked to know as you were about to embark on this journey?
Um, One is that your flight community, if you had one while you were going to school, it's still there. And so you might have moved on to something else, and you might have even moved across to another state or another country. But those people are still there, and they're still understanding, and there's still other people that are going through exactly what you went through as a fly student. And so, even though you're going on into this new territory and you might feel lonely, there's still people who did exactly what you did, graduate college as a fly student. And so I think remembering that you're not alone, that there's people out there, and it's an invisible identity in a lot of ways. So it might be hard to find those people unless you like straight up ask them. But we out here, we out here, we're available, and we're here for you, and we're sending you positive vibes. Um, and then I guess the other part I would say is to, I know it doesn't always feel fun, but enjoy the little things. Like, I really love that I go to the grocery store now because now I have a paycheck, like a real one. And I really like that I go to the grocery store and I'll like buy something that I just feel like buying. I don't look at the price. I buy like, I don't know, a popsicle or like my favorite cookies or something. And before going to the grocery store was so stressful because you're looking at every single price, and I still do that, but I just, whenever I have that, I just need an extra snack or something. The ability to just be able to grab it and buy it, I really like sit with that and enjoy that because that's something that I didn't have before. Um, or what are some other little things like having air conditioning? Like there's just so many things, so many little things that I just whenever I'm stressed, kind of sit there and be like, I have air conditioning. I have multiple bathrooms. A lot of things that I might not have had growing up, or the ability to read a research article. Like I could never, like I that's not something that I would have done if I wouldn't have gone to college. And so really sitting with those small daily things and being like, hey, look at me. We all that work that we as a community put in, for you to graduate and for you to now be an alum and be traveling the world, it's paying off and you're getting to enjoy it. So sitting with that, because a lot of times fly students, we don't have the privilege to be present. We always have to be thinking about the next year and the next step. But really sitting and being able to be like, I did that. That's a big deal. I think would be helpful, or at least it's been helpful for me. So one, your community is still there, and two, go get that popsicle. Enjoy if you have AC, enjoy that you have AC. There's just a lot of things that to be grateful for. And yeah, the fight is not over and you're still gonna be lost sometimes, but you've done a huge thing. And that is to call yourself an alum of someplace.
That is so true. I think just reminding yourself that you accomplished something great and staying there and staying in the community and being around other fly folks and staying in community with them for them to remind you if you're, sitting in that place of appreciation too long, like, like you said, the fight is not over. Come on, come on. We need to do some more work. So I feel like our conversation has had so many different gems. I hope that the folks watching this, I'm sure they have learned so much from you. I'm wondering, Nidia, if you'd care to share, what do you think stood out the most from this conversation, or some themes or that you think stood out from your experience that you shared with us today?
I think the power of reflection, being able to be asked these questions and reflect on them. So these are even questions that if people are watching this, that y'all can ask yourselves, and no one's watching. You can record yourself too. It's just like it's just a way of reflecting and being able to think about this a little bit more instead of the crazy just run-in that we usually do. Um, yeah, so I think that would be my one thing that stood out to me just as I answered these questions, reflecting and being like, "Oh yeah, I do do that." Like, "Oh yeah, I do that." And also like, yeah, it's a lot of reflecting on my values and um what I think about being fly. So that's what I would say.
Well, I want to say thank you so much again, Nidia, excuse me, and Dr. Ruedas-Gracia,
Thanks,
for
Dr. Jackson.
for sharing your story on navigating your FLI identity post Stanford. And thank you all, if anyone is watching, for watching this episode of The FLI Life.
How you are watching? Are we viral yet?
I know, right? Thank you all for watching this episode of The FLI Life, Navigating the Personal Professional Post-Stanford. For more information on the topics discussed today and to become more involved with FLON, be sure to activate your free FLON membership and also follow us on social media. Check out the description below for more details. So thank you again, Nidia, and thank you all for watching.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
If I can say one thing about that, and this is just a alternate view on that, that never even occurred to me.